we'll be starting that conversation today. And just to set the stage, I definitely want to give a shout out to my fabulous advisor who I'm co-conceptualizing this work with, Dr. Angela Wilton in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis. This work is going to be published in the International Journal of Qualitative Studies in Education through a special issue that focuses on youth activism and thinking about how we can better engage with young people and transforming the world. And that's going to be forthcoming either during the summer or fall of this year. They're kind of working through the logistics of that because journals love to just move slow. A little bit more just my positionality as I engage in this work. I'm a Black male youth worker. I've worked with young people in a variety of contexts, from Milwaukee to Detroit, to Madison, and in a national context as well, just talking with young people in virtual settings, leading focus groups with them, and just really trying to dig into this idea of what do you all want to see? How do you want to like transform education? So let me flip the next slide. So before I hop into YouthCrit, we have to ask this question of what is critical race theory? And so critical race theory is a theory of legal origin that does the following. It examines and highlights the relationships between race, racism, and power in the greater society. And this came from this idea of scholars at the time of the civil rights era were frustrated with the fact of people were almost getting it, right? They can understand that things need to be different in America. We need to strive to make things more equitable for everyone. But there was just this constant omission of what is the role that race plays in that. And so with that, these scholars came together from the law field and built upon this idea of critical legal studies where, you know, people were able to voice that there are issues in the legal system in society, but the critical race theorists were coming in and saying that racism is the major cornerstone in upholding this inequality that critical legal studies was just beginning to recognize as not being right. And so that leads us to what is critical race theory doing now when we think about education. And so scholars leverage it to inform and interrogate various different education topics, inside of the classroom, outside of the classroom, across higher education. And it's very uncommon to be used outside of scholars that leverage it. And it's uncommon for it to actually be discussed inside of classrooms, outside of graduate level coursework. So we've seen this recent conversation of critical race theory as this large boogeyman that's trying to get everyone and their kids. And that's just simply not the case. You're literally not engaging with it unless you're in law school or taking graduate coursework. So, which brings us to this next question of why YouthCrit? And so YouthCrit is really predicated on this call for an explicit examination of the intersection of this idea of adultism and racism that racially minoritized young people navigate within their lives. We want to make sure that by acknowledging that this is happening to these young people, that we're providing agency for them, that we're providing an outlet for their own activism to shine through, and ultimately that we're recognizing their voices and honoring what their perspectives are. So recognizing that racially minoritized young people hold unique experiences is just the first step in beginning to combat some of the systematic things that are in place to perpetually oppress folks. And again, really focusing on providing a framing as in YouthCrit that explicitly focuses on this perspective that racially minoritized young people hold. Because in this current era where we're seeing that people's humanities are under attack inside of schools and outside of schools, and young people's humanity has come into light more and more as we're seeing young people organizing against, they don't like that books are being banned that they want to read. They don't like the idea that histories that talk about who they are and where they come from are being viewed as contraband and being removed from school districts. And so young people are coming out into these virtual streets, into these physical streets, and sharing that and disclosing that. And with that, we see examples such as climate change marches. Greta's a really fantastic example of that. She's been a youth activist for a very long time, for a very important topic for us all. We've seen it with school discipline. Even here in Wisconsin, we saw how in 2020, young people organized to get school resource officers removed from Madison School District, Milwaukee Public Schools. And we've seen it in even localized instances of like dress code policies where young people will share that, you know, the way that these policies are set up, we feel like certain people are explicitly being targeted and it's not being held to the same standard for everyone. So how do we do this? We really had this idea of leveraging CRT and education to include young people. So in this moment where we're seeing that, again, critical race theory is being bastardized in the everyday discourse surrounding it, we chose to actually lean into it to really exemplify like what are the strengths and talents that young people have. So that's why we have such, again, an explicit focus on highlighting young people's voices and their experiences in the education context, is because without that, are we really doing the work that serves young people? And so with that, we had to think through, well, what are different ways that people really grapple with critical race theory? Because it comes from this field of legal scholarship and everyone and their moms trying to use it in some different way. So some of the examples that we look towards thinking about, well, how can we make like a youth iteration of this, was looking at Black crit, discrit, Lat crit, tribal crit, and these are just different ways of leveraging that foundation that critical race theory provided in examining these different phenomena, and they made it explicitly specific to what their names give lineage to. And so for us, when thinking about what does youth CRT or YouthCrit looks like, we came away with these tenets of racism and adultism are endemic, meaning that they're indefinite, they're perpetual. Critical race theory gives us this idea that racism is simply embedded in these systems in our society. And we also build on that argument that adultism also is embedded in our society, simply from the way things are structured, right? Adults are usually the people who are the power players at the table. They're usually the final decision makers when it comes to things, even when it comes to making decisions for people that have agency over their own selves, and they're typically omitted from those conversations. This next idea we had is youth social construction, right? And how are young people perceived inside of, how are young people perceived by different social phenomenon? This idea of interest convergence, the idea that people are doing things to simply align with their own interests and not necessarily honoring what young people want. This idea of intersectionality and the hybridity of young people's identities, and that young people have multiple identities to bring to the table. And finally, racially minoritized counter narratives. So how are we actually capturing these stories that young people have? And so as we grapple with that, we really took inspiration from a seminal piece that Gloria Ladson-Billings and Will Tate brought, which was bringing critical race theory actually into the field of education. And in that same piece, they gave the flowers to the legal scholars who were the ones that originally incepted this, Kimberly Crenshaw, Derek Bills, and other folks. And so they, in their paper, talked about how they workshop different iterations of their paper with colleagues in the field of education. So very much so in the same way, myself and AJ are workshopping this idea with different folks from a variety of contexts at conferences, conversations such as this with our trusted colleagues and peers as well. And so as we build upon that, we're conducting and underway with a systematic review of literature from different key areas that look towards having youth and student-centered ideas. And so we've looked at critical youth studies, youth participatory action research, out-of-school time literature, student voice literature, and critical youth empowerment literature, when really thinking through this idea of like, what has already taken place to really centralize young people being as magical and wonderful as they are when it comes to their own experiences and disclosing what those may be. And so with that, again, this just highlights, as we've gone into these different spaces of, getting people's own perspectives and their opinions of like what could be really well to add to this. We based it off of a 2015 article by a professor who used to be here. Her name is Dr. Colleen Capper, and she did a systematic review of how critical race theory has been used in the field of education. And so in the same way, we have this QR code here. If folks have any suggestions of pieces that me or Dr. Wilton might want to peruse when thinking through how can we build upon YouthCrit, definitely scan the QR code and send them our way. I'm going to read through them. She's going to read through them too when she gets a little bit more time. But again, we really want to be intentional about making sure that we leave no stone left unturned when building out this idea of how can we center young people. And so just a brief overview of the actual tenets, and I'll go in depth with that. So again, the first tenet being racism and adultism are endemic. So again, we have underlying oppressive systems in society that perpetually negatively shape the daily experiences, opportunities, and lifelong trajectories of racially minoritized young people. And so just the text on the board really gives this example of, you see it play out in interpersonal and institutional domains that young people navigate. You see it in the way that people have attitudes towards people. You see it in the way of how people's own personal customs are recognized. You see it in young people's interactions with law enforcement. And so it's just this reinforced patronizing assumptions that, again, adults are inherently superior to young people, and therefore it's okay for them to decide what's best for young people versus actually listening to you and understanding, I might have this idea for you that's very contradictory to the idea you have for yourself, but because I'm an adult, I won't engage in that dialogue with you. And so Perry has in 2016 states that it translates to a lack of respect for young people's capacity to engage, to lead, and to even have control over their own lives. And so that's why we just named this tenet in this idea that racism and adultism are endemic. And it's really important to really think through this idea of adultism, because racism is this first step of understanding. Like, we understand this oppression, we understand how folks are being marginalized by this, but we often don't have this piece of adultism at the same table. And it's just reflected in the way our society is constructed. The next tenet that we have is this idea of youth social construction. And so how racially minoritized youth are socially constructed and perceived is a reflection of a particular point in time and socio-political context. So with that, relationships young people have with youth serving spaces, such as schools, after school programs, right? Certain young people have certain perceptions that are placed on them, right? If you have a group of young Black men who might be inside of the school, it might be more people that are more surveillant on them compared to other groups of young people. And so thinking about what's the relationship of these spaces and like how these young people are viewed is incredibly important. And also thinking about this idea of how are racially minoritized young people portrayed when we think about media, when we think about social discourse. Let's think about the news, for instance, right? Very quick to highlight when something is going wrong inside of the school because of what young people have done, but it's very difficult to find instances of all the wonderful things that young people are doing inside of schools, inside and outside of schools, highlighted in the same way that negative news is being featured with that. And so it's, again, very important that we think through, well, just how are young people just constructed and how they're perceived with others. Our third tenet being interest convergence, and this idea that adults are only willing to support racially minoritized young people's interests and aims for justice if it somehow aligns with their own interests, right? And so that really gets at this idea of youth ideas not receiving support unless it's co-signed by an adult. A lot of us do community work, and there are instances where something's just not feasible, but for a variety of different reasons. But sometimes there are instances where the idea is literally just shot down before there is like an actual full discussion about, let's really explore, can we actually do this, right? Also getting at this idea of adultism cultivating opportunities for co-opting, meaning that, it's not uncommon for a young person to come up with an idea and to have someone else's name put on top of said idea, which takes away the flowers that the young person should be really receiving, or also, it's just not the right thing to do at the end of the day. And oops, taking away flowers from young people for things that they come up with. And so with that, how do we push back against these common trends of, adults taking advantage of ideas that young people have, just from different power relationships that might go on, and really making sure that you honor the ideas that young folks have. And then this third idea of there's an intentional lack of recognizing youth ownerships for actions. In the Clay and Turner piece that I referenced for that, Turner was working with some young people out in the LA area, and they wanted to intentionally build a teen youth center, right? And they had gotten some local support for this, and they were talking to different developers, and the developers literally like laughed at them with some of the ideas that the young people had. So like in moments like that, it really disempowered them from feeling that people have their back when engaging in the work. So making sure that, again, young people's actions and their ideas are actually recognized for transforming how things work. And then the next idea that we have is this idea of the intersectionality and hybridity of youth identities. And so again, young people hold a variety of different identities that they have when they walk into any institution, particularly in education. It's not just this idea of you're Black, you're white, you're Hispanic. That's just one layer of it. You know, young people come into the spaces, they hold their own sexual identities, they hold their own gender expression identities. And it's just so many different layers that we all should work towards being conscious of. And when that does not happen, that's where we see a lot of harm and trauma emerge from in these moments. So as Sheath and Salisbury state, there's less of a focus on expansive understanding of students' voices, while also, oh my gosh, that engage with the schooling experiences of racially diverse and multiply marginalized youth. And so again, it's getting at this idea of young people hold multiple identities as they navigate these spaces. So be intentional about honoring each of those identities to the best manner that you can. And then finally, our last tenet of thinking about this idea of racially minoritized youth having their own counter narratives, and how can we amplify those counter narratives, their voices and their leadership, because that in itself is critical for real change to take place for social justice, not only for the field of education, but outside of schools as well. And so this tenet has the intention of bringing humanity to minoritized young people's experiences by combating the hijacking of young people's narratives and honoring the significance of their own lived experiences, because who's going to know what's better for schools? The young people who actually go through schooling moments and things. And, you know, we have our own backgrounds and trainings when it comes to this, but they're the ones who are actually navigating it. And we're just happen to be privileged to be in a position alongside them as they go through that. And so with that, the discussion I really want to think about and challenges and thinking about is, you know, I really want to challenge us all to be better when it comes to that, because in closing, the original purpose of YouthCrit is to recenter historically marginalized young people's full humanity, as young people deserve to navigate spaces without stigmatizing labels placed on them, and understanding that every young person perspective holds legitimacy in understanding their own experiences. And so again, me and Dr. Walton offer YouthCrit as a potential avenue for really illuminating what these experiences mean, how are young people grappling with inequalities, and thinking through those who are looking to address this inequality while working alongside young people. And so on the screen, I have a couple of discussion questions for us to just work through as a group, with the first question being, you know, and I'll open up to folks to chime in, is how would schools in the greater society look if racially minoritized student voices received greater attention? So I don't know, just want to take a stab at that. And folks who are on Zoom, you're more than welcome to chime in as well.
I guess when you say attention, I don't know. I guess I'm thinking more so, are you trying to ask like if it received greater like recognition and like actually being solutions? Because when I think of attention, I think of like RSOs and like how we are getting attention in that way, but in the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I'm all about wording. So.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. I'm thinking about solutions.
Yeah.
Solution orientation.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how it would look depending on the makeup of the professional staff at said school.
you know, I think about that all the time. I think about how many, like, how many times for a young person, how long in their educational journey does it take for them to have an African American instructor or a Latinx instructor or fill in the blank instructor that is not the predominantly, you know, white instructor. So I think for me, like, what is the makeup of that school professional in terms of like the teachers or the administration? Because I think that may or may not dictate how open folks might be in valuing student voice from a student perspective.
Absolutely. That kind of gets at this idea of like, who are you the person who should be engaging in this work, right? Whether it's research, should you be the person engaging in work with this particular population? Like, what's your personal connection to these groups of folks? Or whether it is this idea of like teaching, should you be the person to talk to these particular groups of young people? Now, I don't have an answer to that, but just to think about that, yeah. And Courtney says, I think the layout of schools would look radically different as with the schedule and curriculum.
Yeah, I mean, building off of that, I'm thinking about like, what is it called, banking education, like the traditional model of like, right, like we still see that in higher ed, so like it would. I would imagine that to look very different than that, and one question that was coming up for me, and I don't know if you've stumbled upon this in your research at all yet, but like, I'm thinking about, youth or like cultures that have coming of age ceremonies, like, whether it be quinceañera or like a, bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. It are, when you're maybe in a homogeneous culture that's related, like connected to those, do adults have structures that integrate you, or like, if I'm just curious if those ceremonies play a role in how youth are thought of before and after that, kind of.
I've been in high schools forever, feels like 5 years, since my youngest left high school. But I guess I'm not, so I don't feel like I know the answer to this, but it feels like if there's students, are there structures within the schools where the administration is like focus groups, you know, where they've got a group of very diverse students, you know, different backgrounds, different experiences, where they're asking them questions about, I mean, those are, of course, the schedule, the curriculum, but even, I don't know, like what their experience is like and how, I feel like they have amazing answers to suggestions or how things could be better. I just wonder if schools have systems like that in place, or is that just not so much a thing?
There's some class presidents.
Yeah.
That's one thing.
I also think about like, if they do, then what is the actual power that those youth have? Because I think that's where like things tend to maybe fall apart, like, well, we want your feedback. We'll put it over here and do what we want anyway, so.
Yeah.
So thinking of the power sharing structures in a real way.
That's what my school did.
Yeah.
So that,
Wait, see more.
like, cause when you think about the makeup of my hometown, it's big farm community. So the only like students of color typically came from immigrant families. While, you know, they were born here, their parents weren't, they don't have citizenship, which limited for the students a lot of different opportunities. So like, to sit in a room like this, where they're like, okay, well, tell us how we can make this better. But you're speaking to an entirely white administrative team. Like the only people of color in like an adult role that these students interacted with was the translator. That's the only person that looked anything like them or could relate in any sort of way. And like, what is that really doing? Like, because they're not gonna be able to make an actionable plan that really meets their goals or meets the students' goals if they don't have that lived experience. So I think that just kind of loops back to Jose's answer of like, we need adults who can relate, who can actually like hear what they're saying.
I guess like I have two things. So I was at some Prairie and when I was there, there weren't that many racially diverse students. And I recall in high school, a bunch of us Black students in AP classes got called down out of class because the administrators wanted to know more about how they can help us. But I thought it was interesting because they were only asking the AP students. They weren't asking across the board, like students taking non-AP classes, so they were kind of setting this expectation that maybe we were more intellectual, maybe like we had more of the solutions, we would talk to them more, but kind of also getting at that thing where they were all white administrators, so it was like very weird trying to have that conversation with them. But I think it's like, it's very dangerous to do that, because at the time I honestly felt tokenized. I felt like I was saying what I was saying, but that was not actually gonna create change. And then another thing too, like I only had one Black teacher actually throughout my whole K-12 experience. And she ended up leaving because of the support mechanisms in the school system weren't that great for a Black woman. So I think, yeah, it's great to have that racial diversity of staff members, but we also have to look at like the culture that is within that school and that school system so that we can keep them there, not just to like beat them until they want to leave to do something else.
I had a similar experience in high school where I went to high school in Long Beach, and I was in high school right around the time that the Rodney King verdict was read, right? So there's a lot of like chaos in the streets and throughout LA County, Long Beach being included. We had a race riot at our high school, and the school district partnered up with the National Conference on, it used to be the National Conference on Christians and Jews, changed to National Conference on Communities and Justice, and they did a series of human relations camps with the school districts. So what they did was they invited, recruited student leaders from a diverse array of backgrounds from different high schools. They took us up to the mountains to do these human relation identity like workshops. Amazing. Great conversations that we had amongst, the group. I came back, many of us came back wanting to see our teachers and administrators go through the same thing. Because to put the onus on students to change the culture of the school district or the schools themselves, that wasn't gonna work. So, so I think about that, it's like, that was like a good attempt, but it fell short because the expectation was that these student leaders were going to move the needle. When in fact, the adults, who aren't there for like 4 years, needed to be the ones who did the hard work. Jump out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a really significant tension, right? Of like, who does this labor fall upon? Because you want it to be a better space for young people, but it's not fair that you have to talk to like an 11-year-old or a 14-year-old about something that you yourself should have already done.
Yeah, it's very reactive instead of proactive too. That's the thing that frustrates me, because the whole reason why we got called down was because the incident happened with Black students, so it's like, we should have already been working on this, and you should have been already asking these questions before this happened. Like, I'm glad you're asking now, but like, it would be nice to see that like more proactive approach than reactivity.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, looking at Courtney's question, I even think about this idea of like the scheduling, like K-12 schools start super, super early. And like a lot of kids are waking up at like 5 a.m., 6 a.m. Shoot, I wake up.
Catch a bus.
Yeah, just to catch a bus that might take you like an hour away. Man, that's a lot. Like their day has already started. And then to like go home and all these things, like how can we think through like making it a better, more conducive schedule for them because we're not our best selves if we're waking up at like 5 a.m. and doing that Monday through Friday. And you're sitting in these long classes and you don't get, I mean, they eliminate recess, right? So it's like you just go boom, 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 then you have lunch, then you're back at it, boom, 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 boom. That's a lot. That's a lot.
And you get in trouble if you fall asleep.
Yep, you get in trouble if
But
you.
rather than asking why the student's falling asleep, we just punish them for falling asleep.
Yep.
It's not their fault that their split home means that mom has to commute an hour to get them to school, to get to work on time.
Mhm.
I just feel like a lot of institutions, like even in college, I just feel like there is no institution that's asking the right questions. Like, why are we going punitive right away? Why don't we find out what the background on the student is first? Like, let them share their story.
Sort of punitive culture.
Or also
Yeah.
just think about like, how do you design things? I mean, I think you can even like, take age out of it and like, human-centered
Yeah.
design, like it's human, like we're biological creatures that have needs
Universal
that,
design,
yeah, that we don't like need. Or like.
are you
rest
speaking
and
my
movement,
love language?
Social interaction, yeah.
Absolutely. The next question I have is kind of a question. Is what does combating adultism look like in our practice with young people in the variety of roles that we have as professionals and variety of contexts? What does combating adultism really look like for us?
And as you said before, proactively bringing youth to the table, like not waiting for a reactionary reason to do so.
And he's finding a balance between giving agency, but also recognizing that depending on the age, like, there's obviously a limited resource pool they have.
Yeah, I'd be curious, wanted to hear more about like that piece, like how do you, like, so my background is student development theory, right? Like challenge and support, like what does that look like? And I work with college age, so again, that looks very different, I think, than younger folks. Curious if there's good examples of that in practice.
I'm even thinking about like with my work, which kind of relates to the last question too, but like, there's a lot of topics about parents, especially on social media, who like really exploit their children's medical world and their disabilities, and like, you know, how much agency are you giving your child in that decision to just like have their entire life on social media, intimate aspects of their life? But also like, what does the balance of like allowing your kid the agency to have a say in their medical care, because some parents don't allow that, or like, what does, you know, making their EIP look like? Like what, no, that's not the term one, but you know what I meant. Like what do those supports look like? Not just as a teacher and parent discussing it, but like, what does the child think they need? What if it doesn't feel like it's working for them, but that's all you're willing to give them?
I feel like it also is turning inward to kind of look at like how you were raised, how adultism, like your parents saying, oh, we're doing this because I said so, or like unlearning those different behaviors and perceptions that you grew up with, so that you can look at these young people as autonomous people that have needs, that have interests, that can have potential solutions to really big problems. Like I think with, in my field of like environmental justice, thinking of the intergenerational responsibility we have to save the climate and to save the world, so that young people can be able to grow up and do what they want to do. And I feel like, I don't know, turning inward is a very big part of it.
I love that intergenerational like coalition building towards.
Yeah, it's like like we've had conversations in some of my classes about like, what responsibility do we have for future generations? For doing work in climate change, because like past generations and even currently our generation right now, are doing so many harmful things to the environment that when I grow up, it's not gonna be the same. It's not, when we all grow up, it's not gonna be the same. And yes, it's because of like the decisions of the past generations, so.
Yeah.
I was actually gonna ask if there are any conversations about like intergenerational responsibilities within like youth or education literature, but I was gonna ask that later.
When there's like, I think there are like some indigenous epistemology that
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
See, y'all are building me a little reading list. I'm gonna have.
Sorry.
One thing that comes to mind for the second question, and I know a couple of people spoke to this already a little bit in terms of like turning inward, but I think that there are certain identities that we hold. I mean, they're all socially constructed, but some are perceived as being much more fixed than others. And the journey from being a child to an adolescent to an adult, that for everyone who's an adult, they've been through those other stages. And that can't be said for all identities that people are working across lines of difference with people on. And so I think that depending on people's experiences as children, they might even have a sense of, this sort of old school hazing, like, well, I went through it and X, Y, and Z happened and I'm okay. And it's like, well, first of all, are you? And then secondly, unlearn the unlearning that has to happen, which again was already spoken to, while also contending with that very real acquisition of power that a lot of people don't feel like they have as youth, or they haven't had an opportunity to claim it or to step into it. And so it might feel like, well, this is the natural order of the journey to the acquisition of power. And that paradigm shift is really different. I think there's a lot of different factors, not unlike any other ideological perspective we have around identity, that influences this, from media to religion to what was true for us in our households growing up, that sort of thing. So yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that unlearning and that personal investigation, because there's just a ton that happens to us as kids that we bring into our adults experience. And then if we are going to go around and work with students and young people, as a former teacher, I know I had a lot of work that I needed to do in my work with 13 and 14-year-olds to make me a more empathetic and compassionate person, because of certain things that were true when I was a 13 or 14-year-old that I didn't want to revisit.
Yeah. Yeah, doing the work, personal invest. Goodness gracious. Whew. What a fire space. Okay.
I don't know, I don't know, to throw more wrenches in the. I'm thinking of, I appreciate this conversation and thinking about like stuff that's happening politically and structurally. So like, I know there's been attempts at laws recently that would restrict social media to like kids over 16 or 16, something like that. I don't think they've been passed or anything, but they're like being talked about.
Mm.
And yeah, I know you talked a lot about like youth using social media, being in the virtual streets. And so I'm just thinking about those intersections there. And just those other like laws that are impacting youth, and there's like more child labor now in the US. And how does that play in? If it's like, that's on the opposite end of the spectrum, you're trying to treat them too much like an adult or something like that. Yeah, something like that.
I think that's a great point, Corey, because you're right, like there's this intentionality of making sure that like we don't want this certain group of people to see these things, but we're cool with them working till 2 a.m. It's like, doesn't really
That
work.
will make some money.
Yeah. Yeah, just the
Grocery
same.
farm getting cheaper.
Yeah, no, not at all.
I just think 10-year-olds should be working to pay for that.
I was gonna ask a question, at least thinking about my experience as a young person, like, I feel like there were certain things, especially like physical characteristics, that were kind of, like I was told, oh, don't be grown, or like I'm not even sure what the phenomenon is, but like Black women especially are thought of as, like being too grown, or trying to act like adults or something like that, or like they're perceived as older when they're actually a younger age. And I wonder how that ties into this whole concept of working with young people with adultism within like Black women and Black men, especially. 'Cause I feel like that's a common thing where like we age Black youth up.
Mhm. Absolutely. There's a piece by Quan, and I'll send it to you, but he explicitly talks about this idea, particularly for Black youth, of how, Black girls are adultified, are sexualized, because, and he says that's what like the moral grounding is for like a lot of youth programming, because you want to make sure that you don't have Black girls who are pregnant as teenagers. And then for Black boys framing it as, oh, we don't want them to be delinquent. We don't want them to be out in these neighborhoods, in these streets. So let's put them in like these youth worker programs so that they're giving to society in some positive way, because there's just no way they could do anything else with their life if they're not working, right? And so that's a very important point and distinction, for sure. Gotta love it. But then the final question I have, and then I'll just open it up for like Q&A if folks want to talk about YouthCrit, is this thing of who are the people in your own networks that you can have discussions with about uplifting youth perspective in their work. Right, because everyone in this room call has a very, very robust network. So like, what does that look like in practice?
Thinking about the RSOs that work with our office, so we have a student organization partnership program. There's like, I think it's like 15 student orgs. And I don't know which ones are youth centered, but I'm sure there's got to be some that have like a youth connection, and I'm curious about what we could do to get them to thinking. I feel like, especially as like college students, they feel like maybe they're a little bit more connected to youth, but you know, as you said, that gap, there's so much that can happen. There's such a divide. Something like that.
I was going to mention I work with urban triage, and I know that Brandy has been trying to do more like fun nights out with youth, especially since I think it was in October, November, there was a 14-year-old that was killed by another 14-year-old. So she was trying to get at the point of like, she grew up here, she knows there's nothing else to do here, so we need to start putting in more programming, or start doing more like fun things that the youth want to do, but like covering the costs and like having the staff capacity to be able to put on these events, so that youth are being engaged in ways that they're not just playing with guns and hurting each other.
And I absolutely love that Randy's doing that, because that's actually one of my really big gripes with Milwaukee, of how folks are always asking these questions of like, oh, if something goes wrong, they're like blame it on the Black youth in the city. But then I just flip the question of like, what is there for them to do?
Yeah.
You can't be in the mall after like 3 p.m. You close all these different areas that kids like growing up, we would go for fun, like to the movie theater, to like the park or something. You destroyed the park. It's just like, what am I to do as like a 13-year-old? Oh, well, they can figure it out. Oh, they're figuring it out, so.
Yeah, they're actually, she had a pretty successful event where she took, I think, like about 70 youth from the area, to a trampoline park recently. So, and Urban Triage covered all the costs, they had buses, so people could be able to get to the trampoline park, so just figuring out what types of events youth want to do, and us being able to pick up those different capacities that they don't have, like financial, staff capacity, organizing it, whatever it be. If you're interested in that, CJ, I can let Brandy know. Talk to her more about what she's trying to do with youth violence prevention in the area.
Oh, I'll never turn down a networking opportunity. I love a good conversation. I'm more curious to hear, like, what do folks think about that for us that work in these higher education contexts as well, too? Cause for myself, I think about it in the sense of, like, I'm always gonna bring up this point when I'm in rooms and thinking about labor of like, how do we get young people incorporated into this conversation? Cause I mean, even in a higher ed context, young people want to go to college. What does that look like to make sure that they have opportunities to come to a UW-Madison or a Whitewater or a Milwaukee or a Platteville, and the list goes on, and like really making sure like that's available for them, and like things, moments like that are like honored.
That made me think of Trio, like the whole premise of Trio is to, at least pre-college or, I think it's like SSS is the other one that tries to get into like middle schools and high schools. But like the way that it's formatted, it's helpful, but the resourcing is lacking in some places. Like, I know at least with my experience with McNair, which is focusing mainly on undergrads, federally funded and organized programming, can be tricky to actually be able to do things we want to do.
And my put right scholarship programs that the DEA is hosting some people. Where there is like a summer like high school program or 8th grade, you know, students are coming to campus early and really often. Those seem like amazing opportunities for students. And I guess you could be like college students, and I feel like for our programming, even at the Mortgage Center, having 30 interns, it doesn't mean, and Britlin can share her perspective on that, but just having their voices constantly, like eyes on our programming, whether they are our communicators, that size area, you know, with social media, hopefully influencing what we're doing and how we're doing it, and taking their lead, because I know better what college students want.
One of the culturally, like, right, it works well, that, or like we, as a center staff, they try to support that, and I think that the same can be true for all internships on campus, right? So think about like, yeah, what's unique about our structure, how we engage that work.
Yeah, one of our Wisconsin Debt Fellowship group projects over this past summer, they brought in some Hmong students from the Hmong American Peace Academy, high school students from this campus. And my high school used to do this when I was at East High School, we used to do this a lot too, but they stopped doing that, maybe some resources and whatnot. But they over this past summer, they brought like, I think 30 students, high school seniors, come check out the campus, tour the campus, see what it's campus like. And just talking to all those students, there was like, I never thought about college. I don't know what college is like. This is my first time in Madison. I'm thankful to be here. But that's because of the resources given to that group that was able to fund that college. So, you know, just being able to create that like leeway or that leverage for students who may not have an opportunity to go to college, maybe first gen, low income, and be able to come here, or whether it's Whitewater, Platteville, Milwaukee here, just to see the resources and see the people here at campus. I think that's an opportunity that is great for young folks, but I understand that the resources are like super limited. To bring like 80 students from, you know, Milwaukee or across to Madison or wherever across the state is like a lot of money, right? But I think those resources and just seeing that experience myself, super enlightening, just because like I myself was a high school student once, and like I never thought about coming here, but then like I ended up coming here, and then I'm like, oh man, I can create these opportunities for, you know, students of color, low income, or just marginalized students who don't have opportunities, who don't have the same opportunities to go to college. I think that would be super great, like moving forward to do that. But that was like one of the projects that they did, and it was super successful, and I was just so proud of them. And just hearing the backstory, I was just like, I need to do more of these, but resources are just limited.
When you think about like, that made me think of the Wisconsin Idea Seminar, right? Where the university takes, you know, like 30, 40 faculty, staff, and sends them throughout the state for a week, you know, covering everything. I'm like, oh, we could do the reverse.
Right.
Right, like, we can do that, like, we can do that.
Think about 4-H and how well they're kind of poised to do some of that really well.
And they have.
But, right, and then some, they do it some pretty well. I think, I don't know enough about like what 4-H looks like today, and I grew up in a very white community. But I know it was definitely, my experience perceived as a very white, group, but I think there's a lot of space and opportunity there. There's a
The point.
state resource,
Yeah,
right, and they're
sure.
very spread out. Yeah, and they do a lot of youth programming and work, so, yeah.
That's with extension, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to get back to that point you raised about like college students being viewed as young people. I think that is one of the biggest marks that we miss as like a, just a society, as an institution, because I mean, folks' literal brains are not fully developed until the age of 25. So why is there this disconnection of that? Because I mean, being a youth isn't bad. It's just you're younger. That's it. But yeah, that's a very important thing. I think that we should think more about, not necessarily in this space, but just in general. Yeah. But yeah, that's it. It's 4 minutes left. So if folks have any questions for me in regards to YouthCrit, I'm more than welcome to engage in that with folks.
You should come in, he's in the Alpha program. And so, I mean, we're wrapping up, but you know, I'm just making you feel uncomfortable. You can-
Shannon.
Shannon.
Yeah, I just got
Pleasure.
accepted.
CJ, oh, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
Very excited.
hey, welcome to the family.
Thank you.
Morning, Shannon. Thank you, CJ.
Yeah.
Questions, virtual or otherwise?
We can get back to the question you said you had.
To be honest, I don't remember what it was. Was it the intergenerational one, or was it? Yeah, I don't know, it'll maybe come back to me. Because I know I was talking about like intergenerational responsibilities and stuff like that, like how I see that in the environmental movement and how that might.
Yes, I think it was something along those lines. So I'm not quite sure outside of a Milwaukee context, and I can do some more digging around, but historically, Milwaukee has a very rich history of youth education activism specifically. And when MPS legally had to desegregate, but they didn't, one of the big things was a very well-known Catholic priest there by the name of Father Garapi. He actually worked alongside young people in Milwaukee to like push back on this idea of like, if MPS wasn't going to provide the necessary resources for young people, then we're gonna push them to do that. And so like one of the ways that this intergenerational coalition worked was Milwaukee was the site of freedom schools there. And so a lot of the Black churches in the inner city of Milwaukee, they turned them into freedom schools after the school day had concluded. And so the Black youth and other folks who are interested in learning about like an Afrocentric curriculum will like come to these freedom schools, and different teachers, different professors, different trades people, different business folks will like come in and like teach these lessons to people after the school day was done, after like the work day was done, because they were just so heavily invested in making sure like these young people are like okay and they're getting what they want to get out of and learning about these different things. And it wasn't just your typical Black History Month. We're gonna talk about Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and then there's no other Black people in history. They're really engaging. Yeah, they're really engaging with these ideas of like Shirley Chisholm, Fannie Lou Hamer, and really talking to young people of like, you know, you all can actually be change agents and you can do things. And you know, this is coinciding at the same time with other movements like SNCC. So it's just like it's like there, but I definitely don't think we talk about that enough or engage with that enough because of things like adultism. Because if I'm 29 years old, I'm cool with letting a young person lead the way, just listening. That's not necessarily the case for a lot of other 29 years olds, unfortunately, particularly in the education field where, you know, folks feel real high and mighty. I've got this degree, I've got this certificate. How are you gonna tell me how to do my job better than how I did it already? I did the service learning.
No, you do that, and then you get someone who's more adult than you, and they're like, you're still young.
Mm,
Like,
mhm.
adultism doesn't stop just because you are legally an adult.
That's true, interesting.
Yeah,
Not here, though.
Yeah.
No, I feel like the center actually does a good job.
Oh, Courtney
That's
said,
awesome.
yeah, worked in several freedom schools in rural North Carolina, and the emphasis on local leaders, powerful spaces that do endure. Courtney, we should do a joint paper on that thing. Legitimately, because I gotta go through the historical archives anyway, and, you know,
Yeah, and there was actually an opportunity for folks to do outside of the freedom school spaces, but there were people who were involved in that. That's kind of how I got linked up and organizers with other organizers as well. Doing professional development, like freedom school style professional development for the teachers, and actually doing workshops and getting more immersed in the communities where teachers that I was working with overwhelmingly were not from. And there's like some super cringe ways that I've heard of people doing that. You know, they get on a bus and they do a little poverty tour, and it's just like, ugh. And so when I heard that some of those practices were happening, I wanted to be part of what helped the teachers to bring some of these sentiments into their classrooms, even if they didn't have the full structure and support of freedom schools. So that was my work, was to go and to learn a little bit about what was happening in these spaces, and talk with folks who were running them, as well as some people who drew off of freedom schools in order to do other summer programming, but they weren't freedom schools. They were just kind of trying to incorporate some of those sentiments.
going to head out. All right, have a good day, Brittany. Courtney, I will tap in with you because I think there's a lot of synergy there, because literally no one's done any type of empirical work when it comes to thinking through freedom schools in Milwaukee. So we can do, we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
We'll talk.